This is Johnny Vedmore on today's News Talk TNT.
Now, through your extensive research, and I keep saying extensive, in-depth research because you do a lot. I really like your Twitter thread. Sorry, I got a bit of a lisp. Who have you identified as the major players who have been responsible for manufacturing the COVID pandemic?
It's probably not going to be your typical answer, although I do know one doctor that would side with me on this, and Dr. Robert Malone probably agree with me. The intelligence community of the United States is largely behind most of the pandemic. Yeah. And DARPA, which you could consider it as an intelligence, it's a defense agency, but they work alongside the CIA and the CIA's offshoot called InQtel, which is a non-government organization that does venture capital and technology farming for the CIA and the rest of the intelligence community, and the ODNI, Office of the Deputy Director of National Intelligence. So they're largely behind. It's alarming, but it's largely true. Like, they're behind a lot of it, more than they should.
Yeah, that's amazing for you to say, because normally I get these long lists with the usual answers if I ask a question like that. But I know that the fact is that nearly all of this, from my research, is deep intelligence. They know the direction of the future and they want to be in control of it. Same in Britain as well. I think there's lots of intelligence ties. It's really good that you can recognize that, because a lot of people just don't see that. And so thanks for saying it out loud. It makes people like myself feel less mad, and we're pulling out our hair while we're trying to tell people, no, you want to watch these intelligence agencies, and they say, oh, you're just
it feels crazy, right?
Yeah,
it feels
yeah,
crazy.
indeed.
When you start saying it's the CIA, everyone's like, okay, put on your tinfoil hat now. And I was like, well, is it that crazy, or have you like looked into it? Because it's pretty obvious once you start poking around.
Yeah, I was talking about it in the in the monologue, is about this idea of conspiracy theory being like created by the CIA to stop people from questioning the conspiracies they're creating. So I mean, it's pretty obvious. We people like us, once we've seen it, we can't close our eyes to it, and then we repeat it, and people say, "But that's your answer for everything." Well, I investigate intelligence agencies, so usually that's what I'm looking for, and that's usually what I'm looking in anyway. So, what are some of the most important discoveries that you've made during your deep research of the pandemic and its genesis, its origins?
The most alarming for me was finding out that Moderna is not a legitimate company. It's really not. It pretends to be. It has the hallmarks of what you would consider a real pharmaceutical company. You know, they have a board of directors. It has a fancy website. They sell stocks. It seems very legitimate, and it has a fairly legitimate background. The people invested into it are real people. But when you look further into how the money started trickling into that company, and it just came in these absolutely insane packages of money, like $800 million here, like the first couple of years. And nobody's investing $800 million into a company that's never put out a product. When you start like wondering, like, who's doing this, you know, and then you start seeing, okay, well, this isn't a legitimate company. This is a shell company, essentially, that has probably started off with the best intentions of being a real company. But somewhere along the way, as it does tend to be the case with most shell companies, intelligence comes in that has an agenda of which you are a good pawn to utilize in their game. And I honestly think there's probably a lot of the people in the company that are completely unaware of them being utilized by the intelligence agency. But the fact that Moderna didn't make their own vaccine was my biggest red flag. It was my first viral thread when I tried to show everybody who was making their vaccines. And there's only two companies, Lonza AG, which is a Switzerland company. That goes back, I think, to 1879 or something. It's very old, well-established company in Switzerland. And the other one was called Resilience. Now, Resilience isn't 100% an intelligence operation. I cannot be convinced otherwise. There's too much evidence to support. I mean, the head of it is a man named Chris Darby, who's former president of InQtel just as of last year. And it was inspired by VP of InQtel, Luciana Barrio, who is Council of Foreign Relations, who's best friends with the current president of Resilience, Robert Nelson, who's CIA as well. You have just Drew Otting. He actually puts together the CIA Memorial Fund every year. He's on the board. There's at least 3 or 4 people on there directly linked to the intelligence community. The funding was ridiculous. They changed the name about 3 or 4 different times on paper, which is not something you would do when you're trying to, show yourself as a company that's solid. You're not going to do all these changes real fast in the midst of the largest medical endeavor in history. You're not going to do that unless you're trying to cover up history. And the history that they were trying to cover up was the fact that Resilience, who made from 2021 onward Moderna's COVID-19 vaccines, that company, Resilience, they marketed it as new. And it was not, maybe the name was new, but they had just acquired from previous companies, originally starting off with Nanospore and then Nanotherapeutics, and then it went to Ology Bioservices, then it went to Therapure Biopharmaceuticals, and then it became Resilience. And they said, oh, look at this new startup. No, it's not a new startup. All those previous companies are actually DoD contractors that make biological weapon countermeasures.
Talk that matters. Johnny Vedmore on today's News Talk, TNT.